Jerome Henry Brudos was born on January 31, 1939, in Webster, South Dakota. From the outset, his life was marked by disappointment and hardship. As the second son, his arrival was a source of deep disappointment for his mother, who had longed for a daughter. This resentment would shape his childhood, subjecting him to relentless physical and emotional abuse. Affection was a foreign concept. He was raised in an environment devoid of kind words or comforting embraces, knowing only harsh beatings and scoldings. The Brudos family moved frequently across the Pacific Northwest, never settling in one place for long. This instability only added to Jerry's feelings of neglect and isolation. Eventually, they settled in Salem, Oregon. By this time, Jerry had become a deeply unhappy child, burdened by the weight of his mother's cruelty. Yet, amid his suffering, he stumbled upon something that provided him with a fleeting sense of joy. One day, while exploring a local junkyard, Jerry discovered a pair of high-heeled shoes. Captivated, he took them home and slipped them on. The sensation excited him in a way he had never experienced before. However, this moment of curiosity was abruptly shattered when his mother caught him. Furious, she punished him severely, but rather than deterring him, this experience only deepened his obsession. As he grew older, Jerry's fixation expanded beyond shoes to include women's lingerie. He began stealing undergarments from neighbors, carefully hiding his trophies. By the age of 12, his compulsions escalated. He stole high heels from his teacher and undergarments from classmates. His alarming behavior led to therapy and even psychiatric hospitalizations. But nothing seemed to change. Adolescence intensified his impulses, and he began targeting women, attacking them and stealing their shoes. The stolen garments became symbols of control and domination. At 16, Jerry took his obsessions to a horrifying new level. He abducted a young girl, assaulted her, and threatened her with a knife. His attack was interrupted by an elderly couple, leading to his arrest. In custody, he confessed without hesitation. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a deep-seated hatred for women, particularly his mother. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, doctors believed his behavior was rooted more in immaturity than true danger. Convinced he would outgrow his disturbing tendencies, they released him after 9 months. Upon reaching adulthood, Jerry attempted to reintegrate into society by enlisting in the military, but his unusual obsessions led to his discharge. He then trained as an electronics technician. In 1961, at 22, he met 17-year-old Darcy and quickly fell in love. They married soon after and had 2 children. However, Jerry proved to be as cold and violent toward his children as his mother had been toward him. Affection was non-existent, and discipline came through force. With Darcy, he was passionate, but demanded she perform household chores while wearing only high heels and insisted on photographing her in provocative poses. Though uncomfortable, she feared confronting him. By the mid-1960s, Jerry began experiencing severe headaches and frequent blackouts. He insisted that the only way to relieve his symptoms was to go on nocturnal raids, breaking into homes to steal women's shoes and lingerie. These stolen items became his treasures, hidden in his garage, which he guarded fiercely. In 1968, Jerry decided to take his fantasies to a far darker level. On January 26, 1968, he encountered 19-year-old Linda Slauson, a door-to-door saleswoman. When she knocked on his door, he was immediately drawn to her, and his sinister urges awakened. He lured her inside with lies despite his wife and children being home. Once inside, he struck her unconscious and dragged her into the garage. Not a single member of his family heard a sound. Inside, he strangled Linda to death. Afterward, he undressed her, replacing her clothing with items from his collection. He slipped high heels onto her lifeless feet and posed her for photographs, preserving the moment forever. After committing his first murder, Jerry realized he couldn't keep Linda's body hidden forever. He grotesquely removed her left foot, placing it in a freezer to use as a model for his high-heeled shoes. The rest of her remains were disposed of in a river, tied to a car engine. When he returned home, he fixated on the severed foot, slipping different pairs of heels onto it and taking photographs. It became his most treasured trophy. Meanwhile, Linda's disappearance went unnoticed for weeks. Her family reported her missing, but the publishing company she worked for had no record of her movements that day. Eventually, the police found her abandoned car, but there were no signs of a struggle or foul play. Investigators moved on, and the case faded into obscurity. Jerry, however, was elated. He believed he had committed the perfect crime. But the satisfaction didn't last. His hunger for violence grew stronger over the following months. On November 26, 1968, 23-year-old Jan Whitney was traveling home for Thanksgiving when her car broke down. Jerry appeared as a helpful stranger, offering her a ride. Once inside, he attacked her with a leather strap and subjected her to horrific abuse. He suspended her body in his garage, leaving it hanging for several days. During that time, he dressed her, photographed her, and assaulted her again. He even amputated one of her breasts, creating a grotesque paperweight. When he was done, he tied her body to a heavy object and dumped it in a river. A few days later, police discovered Jan's car abandoned near Albany, exactly where it had broken down. The car was locked, and authorities theorized she may have sought help from a passing driver. Jan simply vanished, leaving no clues or leads. Jerry remained untouchable, and his thirst for blood intensified. On March 27, 1969, 18-year-old Karen Sprinker parked her car outside a department store. As she stepped out, Jerry, disguised in women's clothing, forced her into his vehicle at gunpoint. He drove her to his garage, where he forced her to model his lingerie collection before strangling her. Even in death, his cruelty continued. He mutilated her body, removing her breasts to create additional resin molds. He weighed down her remains and discarded them in a river. That afternoon, Karen's mother waited for her at a downtown restaurant, excited to reunite after months apart. But Karen never arrived. After waiting over an hour, her mother called the police. Investigators quickly located her car in the department store's parking garage, her keys and belongings still inside. Witnesses reported seeing a tall, odd-looking woman in the area that day, but one person claimed to have realized that this woman was actually a man in disguise. Authorities had no reason to connect it to Karen's disappearance. Less than a month later, on April 21, 1969, 24-year-old Sharon Wood left her job in Portland to meet her ex-husband. As she reached her car in an underground parking lot, she felt something hard press against her back. A voice ordered her not to scream. Turning around, she saw a tall, freckled man pointing a gun at her. It was Jerry, hunting for his next victim. Sharon fought back fiercely, managing to bite his hand and drawing blood. In the struggle, she tried to wrestle the gun from him. Enraged, he slammed her head against the concrete, stunning her. But before he could finish, he heard footsteps approaching and fled, leaving Sharon battered but alive. A witness called the police, and Sharon provided a detailed description of her attacker, a tall man with blue eyes and freckles. However, when investigators searched the area, no one matching that description could be found. The very next day, on April 22nd, he attempted to abduct 15-year-old Gloria Smith in Salem. He tried to force her into his car, but she escaped and reported the incident, describing a large, freckled man driving a sports car. Investigators noted the similarity between both attacks, but without physical evidence, the suspect remained unidentified. On April 23rd, 22-year-old Linda S. set out to buy a gift for her boyfriend. As she walked through a mall parking lot, Jerry approached her, flashing a fake police badge. He accused her of shoplifting and threatened to arrest her unless she followed his instructions. After bringing Linda to his garage, Jerry restrained her. Although she didn't attempt to escape, she fought back when he returned and tried to strangle her with a leather strap. Unfortunately, her resistance wasn't enough to save her life. Once she was lifeless, he indulged in his usual twisted rituals, but this time he hesitated to mutilate her body, finding her skin too soft. Instead, he experimented with electricity, attempting to make her corpse twitch under the current, but ultimately failed. Unsatisfied, he tied her remains to a car transmission and dumped them into a river. The following day, Linda never showed up for work. Her car was found abandoned, just like the others, with no sign of a struggle or robbery. As in previous cases, her disappearance left investigators without immediate leads. Suspicion briefly fell on her boyfriend, but there was nothing to connect him to her vanishing. By this point, the Oregon police began to notice patterns among the missing women. They built a timeline, realizing that all the victims had disappeared in the latter half of each month. Most were young white women, many of them students, last seen in public places, mainly parking lots. However, despite these observations, they had no physical evidence to pursue. That changed on May 10, 1969, when a fisherman spotted what looked like a bundled package floating in the water. When he approached, he realized it was something far more sinister: the weighted-down body of a woman still wearing her coat. Authorities arrived quickly, and forensic analysis soon identified the remains as one of the recently missing women, Linda S. The autopsy confirmed she had been strangled, with additional post-mortem injuries that stood out. 2 puncture wounds, one on each side of her ribcage, were surrounded by burn marks, evidence that someone had used electric shocks on her body. Investigators were now certain they were dealing with a sadistic killer, someone who took pleasure in tormenting his victims even after death. 2 days later, as divers continued searching the river, they made another grim discovery. A second body, severely decomposed and tied to the engine of a car, was pulled from the water. The bindings matched those found on Linda, suggesting the same killer was responsible for both murders. The victim had been strangled, likely with a leather strap. Investigators strongly suspected the second body belonged to Karen. Her mother had described the outfit she was wearing when she disappeared, and the clothing on the recovered body matched. However, one detail stood out. The victim was also wearing an oversized black bra stuffed with crumpled brown paper towels. It became clear that this was part of the killer's bizarre fantasies. When dental records confirmed the body was indeed Karen, detectives realized they were officially hunting a serial murderer. Determined to track him down, investigators built a psychological profile of the suspect. They believed he was likely between 20 and 30 years old, had experience with electrical work, and was methodical in his actions. The double knots used on the bindings suggested someone skilled with their hands, possibly a technician or engineer. They also theorized that he had grown up in a household dominated by an abusive mother, which could explain his deep-seated rage toward women. Despite this promising profile, they still had no clear suspect. Turning to the social circles of Karen, detectives visited her university, questioning her classmates in hopes of uncovering any unusual encounters before her disappearance. Several students reported receiving disturbing phone calls from a man pressuring them to go on dates. Others mentioned a suspicious red-haired, heavyset man frequently seen loitering around campus. The breakthrough came when one student recounted a recent meeting with a man claiming to be a war veteran who just wanted someone to talk to. She had agreed to meet him on campus and provided a description. He was tall, had light-colored hair, and was covered in freckles. This matched the descriptions given by previous victims who had narrowly escaped. The student recalled that during their conversation, the man had made unsettling comments about the missing women whose bodies had recently been found in the river. When he invited her for a walk, she declined, sensing something was off. Before leaving, he promised to call her again the following week. Now detectives saw an opportunity. They urged the young woman to accept his next call and arrange another meeting while police prepared to intervene. On May 25th, as expected, the man called again. The student agreed to meet him, and an hour later, he arrived at the university. He matched the description perfectly: tall, freckled, and overweight. Detectives who had been waiting nearby immediately took notice. When questioned, the man introduced himself politely. His name was Jerry Brudos. He explained that he worked as an electrician, lived in Salem with his wife and 2 children, and seemed completely at ease. His calm demeanor was unsettling. There was no nervousness, no sign that he felt threatened by the police's presence. Lacking concrete evidence to detain him, detectives had no choice but to let him go. However, before he left, they noted the license plate number of his car. Back at the station, investigators ran his information through the police database and uncovered 2 crucial details. First, Brudos had a history of psychiatric treatment for disturbing sexual behavior. Second, records showed that Linda S. had been in his neighborhood shortly before she disappeared. It was the first real link connecting him to the crimes. Determined to confront their prime suspect, detectives made their way to Brudos's home in Salem. As one detective engaged Jerry in conversation, the other discreetly examined his home, eventually reaching the garage. There, he found more copper wires, some tied in the same intricate knots that had been discovered on the victims pulled from the river. Suspicion mounted as police obtained a warrant to search Brudos's car. Inside, they found that the interior had been meticulously cleaned, too thoroughly, as if he had tried to erase any trace of evidence. Though this alone wasn't enough to charge him, detectives soon remembered the statement given by Gloria, the 15-year-old girl who had escaped an attempted abduction. They arranged a police lineup, and when Gloria was brought in, she immediately identified Brudos as the man who had tried to force her into his vehicle. This was the break they needed. Brudos was arrested and held on multiple charges, including possession of an illegal firearm, as a gun had been found in his vehicle. Realizing that police were closing in on him, he instructed his wife to burn his collection of women's clothing and lingerie, items that could directly link him to his crimes. However, Darcy, who had long grown tired of her husband's disturbing behavior, did not comply. Instead, she allowed investigators full access to the garage, leading to the discovery of what would later be known as the Chamber of Horrors. On May 29, 1969, Brudos was formally taken into custody as police conducted a second, more thorough search of his home. This time, they uncovered a hidden stash of women's high-heeled shoes, along with an extensive collection of lingerie, including bras, girdles, panties, and slips. But the most damning evidence was a set of photographs, images so disturbing that they left no doubt about his guilt. Among them were pictures of Brudos himself dressed in women's undergarments, but far more chilling were the photographs of his victims. One image depicted a lifeless body dressed in various outfits, posed as though it were still alive. However, one photograph sealed his fate. It showed a young woman dressed in black lace lingerie and girdles, suspended from the ceiling by a rope. A mirror on the floor reflected the gruesome scene from below, and in the lower corner of the frame, the reflection of the killer was captured. Brudos himself, staring with satisfaction at the corpse he had just posed. On June 4, 1969, Brudos was officially indicted. He initially pleaded not guilty, and his trial soon became a media sensation. He attempted to claim insanity, portraying himself as a victim of an abusive mother who had shaped his deviant tendencies. He even wept before psychiatrists, hoping to gain their sympathy. But the experts weren't fooled. 7 psychologists reviewed his case and rejected his insanity plea, diagnosing him instead with antisocial personality disorder. They concluded that while he was deeply disturbed, he was fully aware that his actions were wrong. He was described as a narcissistic psychopath with a high IQ, calculated, manipulative, and entirely self-absorbed. Realizing there was no chance of an acquittal, Brudos changed his plea. He confessed to the murders of Jan Whitney, Karen Sprinker, and Linda S. He also admitted to killing Linda Slauson, the encyclopedia saleswoman, but was never convicted for her murder as no remains were found, nor did he keep photographs of her. On June 28, 1969, the court sentenced Brudos to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His reign of terror was officially over. In the aftermath, his wife Darcy was briefly arrested and investigated as a potential accomplice. A neighbor claimed to have seen her assisting Brudos with one of his victims, but there was no concrete evidence to support the claim. Without proof of her direct involvement, she was acquitted. In 1970, she divorced Brudos, changed her name, and disappeared with their children, severing all ties to the notorious killer. Brudos's final years were marked by declining health after suffering from liver cancer for several years. He died in the prison infirmary on March 28, 2006, at the age of 67. At the time of his death, he was the longest-serving inmate in the Oregon Department of Corrections. It was an early morning on Anjuna Beach, a place celebrated for its stunning shores and vibrant nightlife. But on this particular day, something was terribly amiss. A passerby strolling along the sand noticed something unusual. As they approached, they were horrified to discover the lifeless body of a young woman, barely dressed. Just hours earlier, she had been reveling in the night, surrounded by music, lights, and new friends. But somewhere between the crowded bars and the quiet beach, a tragedy unfolded. Who had been with her in those final moments? What truly happened that night? And why did the authorities seem so eager to dismiss it? This is the story of Scarlett King, a girl who came to India seeking adventure but never returned home. Scarlett King was born in July 1992 in England, the third of 9 children raised by her single mother, Fiona. Fiona's parenting style was anything but conventional. She lived life on her own terms, unapologetically defending her choices. Her own upbringing had been challenging, growing up in public housing with a single mother. Determined to carve her own path, Fiona moved out at 16, where she faced a harrowing incident involving an employer that led to a serious legal consequence. Despite her tumultuous past and 5 different romantic partners, Fiona raised Scarlett and her siblings in a unique environment, fostering a lifestyle that defied societal norms. Instead of formal schooling, she homeschooled her children, granting them freedoms that were uncommon for others in their town. The family lived on a sprawling 200-acre property, running a caravan park and bus camping site. They grew their own food and raised animals, allowing Scarlett and her siblings to immerse themselves in nature. In 2007, Fiona began a relationship with 47-year-old Rob Clark, and together they decided to embark on a cultural adventure in India. They planned to explore new opportunities and possibly start a business renting out ponies for rides. After selling one of their ponies and pooling their resources, they boarded a flight to Goa on November 22, 2007, with 8 of Fiona's children. The eldest chose to stay in England. Adapting to life in Goa was a stark contrast to their secluded existence in England. Fiona was open about alcohol, knowing her children enjoyed drinking and partying as long as they didn't go overboard. While she discouraged drug use, she believed in educating them about risks rather than imposing outright prohibitions. In Goa, Scarlett embraced her newfound freedom, expanding her social circle and making the most of her independence. During this time, she met Julio Lobo, a 25-year-old tour guide, and they quickly developed a romantic relationship. After 2 months, the family planned to move along the coast, but Scarlett was granted permission to stay in Goa for a Valentine's Day celebration in Anjuna. She convinced Fiona to let her stay with Julio and his family, whom Fiona had found warm and welcoming. On February 14th, Fiona received devastating news. Her eldest son in the UK had been seriously injured in a car accident. the family had to cut their trip short and return home sooner than planned. On February 17th, Fiona urged Scarlett to come home immediately, but Scarlett was determined to enjoy her last night in Goa. Julio, feeling unwell, stayed home while Scarlett went out with Ruby, a 16-year-old Dutch girl she had befriended. They set off to explore Goa's nightlife, but around 1 a.m., they parted ways. Ruby headed home while Scarlett continued to party at a bar. Although Ruby stated they hadn't used drugs that night, she acknowledged that Scarlett had smoked cannabis in the past and might have taken something if offered. What transpired in the hours that followed remains unclear, but drugs were undoubtedly involved. Just after dawn on February 18, 2008, Scarlett's bruised and partially clothed body was discovered on Anjuna Beach. An anonymous caller alerted the authorities, and investigators noted her clothing scattered nearby, along with a pair of orange sneakers that did not belong to her. Scarlett's family was notified, and they rushed back to Goa to determine their next steps. A post-mortem examination revealed multiple bruises and signs of struggle, ruling out accidental death. In a shocking twist, one of the lead investigators held a press conference declaring that Scarlett had died accidentally after passing out on the beach due to drug consumption. This statement devastated her family, especially Fiona, who had seen her daughter's body and knew the investigators' claims were false. Determined to seek justice, Fiona enlisted the help of lawyer Vikram, who demanded that Scarlett's case be treated as a crime rather than an unfortunate accident. Fiona's relentless pursuit of the truth led her to take secret photographs of Scarlett's body during a visit to the morgue, seeking evidence that authorities were denying. On March 2nd, she made bold accusations in front of British journalists, claiming that Goa's police were covering up the sexual assault and murder of her daughter to protect the region's reputation as a tourist paradise. She pointed out the lack of real investigation, citing the torn clothing left on the beach as evidence. Public outcry forced officials to conduct a second autopsy on March 3rd, which confirmed Fiona's suspicions. The findings showed extensive evidence of violent struggle and sexual assault, with injuries concentrated around Scarlett's pelvis and upper back. Toxicology results revealed a mix of drugs in her system, including ecstasy, cocaine, and LSD. But the amount of water in her lungs was insufficient for a typical drowning, suggesting she had been submerged in shallow water. Despite this new evidence, both the police and Goa's chief minister initially resisted reclassifying Scarlett's death as a murder, framing it as an accident even as the case gained international media attention. Eventually, under immense pressure, it was revealed that a British carpenter named Michael Mannion had been one of the last people to see Scarlett alive. He described intervening when suspicious-looking men approached her outside a bar, and later saw her in the company of bar staff, including bartender Samson D'Souza and employee Placo Carvalho. Witnesses confirmed that Scarlett had taken more drugs in their presence. Alarmed by what he saw, Michael ultimately walked away without intervening. On March 9, 2008, Indian authorities arrested Samson, the last person seen with Scarlett before her death, and later arrested Placo, rumored to be a drug dealer. Both men faced serious charges, including manslaughter and sexual assault. However, just days later, the focus shifted to Fiona, who was criticized for not keeping Scarlett safe. The media vilified her for her unconventional lifestyle, scrutinizing her as a single mother of 9 who homeschooled her children. On March 25, 2008, Fiona announced that a third suspect had been arrested, speculated to be Scarlett's boyfriend, but the police did not confirm this. Fiona, fearing for her safety after publicly accusing authorities of covering up her daughter's murder, was granted police protection. The bureaucratic process dragged on, and by March 2008, 2 key figures in the initial investigation were dismissed for obstructing justice. Yet, progress on the case stalled again. In June 2008, a new team of detectives took over, but optimism quickly faded. On September 24, 2008, a court ruled there was insufficient evidence to link Sampson to the attack, granting him bail. It was later revealed that Placo had also been granted bail without public announcement. In April 2010, the court acknowledged that the official police report was riddled with contradictions. The trial against Sampson and Placo began, but the prosecution faced significant setbacks, including the absence of key witness Michael, who had left India. Ultimately, both men were acquitted due to a lack of evidence, largely citing Michael's missing testimony. In February 2017, it was announced that both men would be retried after India's Central Bureau of Investigation filed an appeal against the verdict. This news brought renewed hope to Fiona, but she remained realistic about the challenges ahead. In 2019, a breakthrough occurred when the High Court overturned Sampson's acquittal, marking the beginning of a new trial. Key evidence emerged in the form of a pair of orange sandals left behind by the accused. Witnesses testified to seeing the sandals near Scarlett's body, and Sampson's nervous behavior upon inquiring about them suggested guilt. Ultimately, the court sentenced Sampson D. Souza to 10 years in prison for culpable homicide, criminal assault, and other charges. Placo was acquitted of all charges. Fiona expressed relief that justice had finally been served, but reflected on the immense toll the case had taken on her and her family. Despite the long and painful process, Fiona believed the outcome was a victory for Scarlett, who had finally received the justice she deserved. As she prepared to move forward and rebuild her life, she remained vocal about the barriers she faced throughout the investigation, including the heartbreaking delay in reclaiming Scarlett's body, which took 4.5 years. On the night of August 5, 2002, the small, serene town of Troop, Texas, was settling in for what seemed like another peaceful evening. Porch lights flickered gently, families relaxed in their homes, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping. Everything appeared normal, but inside the parsonage of the local Methodist church, a horrifying event was unfolding that would shatter the tranquility of this close-knit community. A frantic knock on a neighbor's door broke the silence of the night. Standing there was Pastor Mike Tabb, his 2 young children clinging to him. His face was pale, his hands trembled, and he was visibly out of breath. With an urgent voice, he begged for help, claiming that something terrible had happened at home. Minutes later, police arrived at the scene, and what they discovered inside the Tabb residence left even the most seasoned officers in shock. The bedroom was a scene of utter chaos. Broken picture frames lay scattered on the floor. Furniture was overturned, and signs of a violent struggle were evident everywhere. In the center of it all lay Marla Tabb, motionless on the floor, still dressed in her nightclothes. Initially, it appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong, but as investigators delved deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. The loving wife, the respected pastor, the peaceful town, none of it aligned with the brutality of the crime. What truly transpired that night, and who was to blame? Mara Tabb was born on April 25, 1967, in Beaumont, Texas, the second daughter of Jim and an unnamed mother. Growing up in a household filled with music and the arts, Mara developed a passion for music early on. Her parents nurtured her talents, encouraging her to explore her interests. By age 11, she had fully embraced her Christian faith, becoming actively involved in her Methodist church and dedicating herself to outreach programs that spread God's message to various communities. Mara's exceptional singing voice, often accompanied by a piano or guitar, touched many hearts. Friends described her as kind-hearted and principled, someone who formed strong bonds and maintained them despite time and distance. Her striking beauty and charismatic personality left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Recognizing her passion, her supportive parents enrolled her in a prestigious private university in Texas, where she flourished and gained a deeper understanding of her craft. Mara remained devoted to her faith, using her musical gifts to serve the church. She eventually became the director of music and youth ministry, leading worship with her powerful soprano voice. For 3 seasons, she played a key role in organizing the church's musical productions across Texas. Raised in a household where faith guided every aspect of life, Mara dreamed of building a family rooted in love and devotion to God. This dream began to take shape when she met Michael "Mike" Tabb. Born on July 7, 1961, Mike grew up in a family deeply committed to the Methodist Church. He was the middle child among 3 brothers and was raised with strong values instilled by his parents, Eleanor and Harold Tabb. When Mike decided to dedicate his life to ministry, his family viewed it as a true blessing. After completing his studies at a Methodist Christian school, Mike was assigned as a chaplain at a military camp in North Carolina. Meanwhile, Mara continued to serve actively in her church, and their paths crossed often. She led the worship music, and he delivered the sermons. Over time, a strong friendship blossomed, built on mutual admiration and shared faith. This connection soon deepened into a loving and respectful relationship. As their love grew, Mike knew he wanted to spend his life with Mara. A few months into their courtship, he visited her parents to formally ask for her hand in marriage. With their blessing, he presented Mara with an engagement ring, marking the beginning of their journey toward marriage. In 1998, they exchanged vows in a Methodist church, pledging to love, respect, and support each other in all circumstances, always guided by their faith. At 31 and 37 years old, respectively, Mara and Mike began their married life together, settling at the military camp where Mike continued his pastoral duties. Mike quickly gained a reputation as a powerful preacher capable of moving even the most skeptical hearts. His sermons inspired many to turn to God, and he was viewed as a devoted disciple of Christ, committed to spreading the gospel. Mara, now known as Mara Tabb, became his steadfast partner in ministry, dedicating herself wholeheartedly to supporting him and their mission. 2 years into their marriage, Mara received the joyful news that she was expecting their first child. On April 25, 2000, they welcomed a baby boy named Jonathan. His arrival brought immense happiness, and Mara devoted herself to raising him while Mike continued his work as a minister. However, as Mike's reputation as a preacher grew, so did the demands on his time. He was frequently invited to speak at churches across the country, leading to extended absences from home. Mara, now a young mother, found it increasingly difficult to cope with his constant travels. She longed for his presence, feeling the strain of raising their child largely on her own. Their once unshakable harmony began to face its first true challenge. Despite her husband's frequent absence, Mara found some comfort in the security of the military camp, where she had built strong friendships and enjoyed a supportive environment. During this time, Mara suffered a heartbreaking loss. She became pregnant again, but miscarried shortly after. Juggling the demands of motherhood with the emotional toll of a failed pregnancy, Mara found it increasingly difficult to cope with Mike's prolonged absences. Their relationship became strained as disagreements escalated. While she longed for him to be more present, Mike insisted that his commitments required frequent travel. Despite their struggles, the couple attempted to mend their relationship, and by 2002, things seemed to be improving when Mara announced she was expecting another child. This news temporarily brought a sense of peace to their home, but their relief was short-lived. Unexpectedly, Mike received news that he was being discharged from military service and reassigned to a civilian Methodist church. With little time to process the sudden change, he was transferred to Troop, a small agricultural town in Texas with a population of just 1,900. The timing could not have been worse. Mara was nearing the end of her pregnancy, already caring for their 2-year-old son, and now faced an abrupt move. Despite her reluctance, the transition had to be made quickly. The arrival of the new pastor and his family was a major event for the tight-knit community. Aware of Mara's advanced pregnancy, the women of the church took it upon themselves to prepare the parsonage for the family's arrival. However, overwhelmed by the recent upheaval, Mara struggled to adjust. She did not express gratitude in the way the congregation expected, which led to whispers about her being distant and unapproachable. Adjusting to civilian life proved to be a significant challenge. The shift from the structure of military ministry to a small-town congregation, coupled with financial uncertainties and the stress of their growing family, put additional strain on their marriage. Both Mara and Mike felt the pressure of being scrutinized by the congregation, whose members closely observed their every move. As tensions mounted, Mara found herself the subject of town gossip. One particular incident cemented her reputation among the townspeople. In a moment of frustration, she publicly confronted Mike, which was seen as a sign of disrespect in this conservative rural community where traditional gender roles were deeply ingrained. From that moment, many labeled her as a domineering wife who mistreated her husband. Increasingly unhappy, Mara began to confide in trusted friends and family about her struggles. She questioned whether the life she was living bore any resemblance to the Christian home she had once dreamed of. The stress took a toll on her health, and when labor complications arose, she was rushed to the hospital for an emergency C-section. On July 25, 2002, she gave birth to another baby boy. Jonathan, now 2 years old, was thrilled to have a little brother to look after. Mara took time to recover, and once she regained her strength, she attempted to reconnect with the community and resume her role as the pastor's wife. However, she never fully adapted to her new surroundings. The difficulties of the past months had left deep scars, and the strain in her marriage continued to grow, affecting the atmosphere at home. Like any couple facing hardships, they could have worked through their differences or chosen an amicable separation. However, what happened next shattered any possibility of resolution in the most tragic way imaginable. On the night of August 5, 2002, the police received a frantic 911 call redirected from emergency dispatch. The caller was a neighbor of the Tabb family who reported that Pastor Mike had arrived at their doorstep in distress, carrying his 2 young children and begging for help. His wife had been brutally attacked and was unresponsive. Emergency responders, including sheriff's deputies and firefighters, rushed to the parsonage where they were met with a devastating scene. Mara, just 6 weeks postpartum, had been found in her bedroom, still dressed in her nightclothes. Even the most seasoned officers were shaken by the brutality of what they saw. The crime scene was in complete disarray. Broken picture frames, overturned furniture, and scattered belongings indicated a violent struggle. Investigators immediately began gathering evidence, while others questioned Mike about the events of that evening. He claimed that he had just arrived home only to find the front door open and his wife lying motionless on the floor. After checking for a pulse and finding none, he rushed to the children's room, grabbed both boys, and fled to the neighbor's house for help. Mara's body was transported to the morgue for an autopsy. Initial observations were grim. Her face was severely disfigured and her jaw was fractured. A forceful blow to the head appeared to have been the fatal injury. As investigators worked to determine the murder weapon, one comment from Mike stood out. Without being prompted, he speculated that his wife had been attacked with a baseball bat, a detail that raised immediate suspicion as the authorities had not yet determined the cause of death. Detectives pursued various leads, initially considering the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong. However, this theory was quickly dismissed as nothing of value was missing from the home. Another possibility emerged, a crime of passion with no clear suspect. Investigators remained open to all possibilities. That night, Mike was asked to take his children somewhere safe, and they were temporarily placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. Law enforcement then requested his clothing and shoes for examination and questioned him about his whereabouts earlier that evening. He stated that he had taken his 2-year-old son to his parents' house, a claim they later confirmed. In a town where violent crime was nearly unheard of, the last recorded homicide had been 5 years earlier, news of Mara's brutal death spread rapidly. The entire community was horrified by the nature of the attack, and many sympathized with Mike, who now faced the daunting task of raising 2 small children alone. When the preliminary autopsy report was released, it confirmed that Mara had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Her jaw had been fractured in multiple places, further indicating the extreme violence of the attack. Mara's funeral was held in an intimate ceremony where a fellow minister spoke about her unwavering faith and dedication to God. Though her death was a profound loss for those who loved her, the sermon framed it as a transition to eternal peace. Throughout the services, Mike was visibly grief-stricken, his sorrow deeply moving those in attendance. Meanwhile, investigators continued speaking with those close to Mara, hoping to uncover any clues that might shed light on the case. A breakthrough came when they interviewed Mara's sister, Melanie. Fighting back tears, she revealed that her sister had confided in her just weeks before her death, expressing deep distress over her crumbling marriage. Mara had stumbled upon something unexpected, a promotional flyer for an exotic dance club tucked into the pocket of Mike's pants. When she confronted him, he claimed it belonged to a congregation member he had been counseling, but Mara wasn't convinced. As she dug deeper, she discovered a troubling pattern. The church-related trips Mike frequently took were not for ministry work, as he had claimed, but rather opportunities to indulge in a secret life that contradicted everything he preached. Investigators followed this lead and uncovered 2 separate P.O. boxes, one in Troop and another in North Carolina, where the couple had previously lived. These hidden mailboxes had allowed Mike to keep his double life concealed from his family. Determined to gather concrete evidence supporting their theory that Mara had been killed because she intended to divorce Mike and expose his deception, authorities placed him under covert surveillance. They suspected he would soon reveal his true nature, and they were right. Mike was frequently seen visiting illicit establishments, including escort services and strip clubs, where he often drank heavily. Just days after Mara's funeral, he was spotted entering an exclusive club known for catering to high-profile clientele. Investigators pressed on with their inquiries, leading to the discovery of what they believed to be the murder weapon. While the crime scene had been meticulously cleaned, one crucial detail had been overlooked: a large wooden table missing one of its legs. Forensic tests using luminol revealed traces of Mara's blood inside the trunk of Mike's vehicle, as well as on his shoes, including the laces. With this irrefutable evidence in hand, law enforcement worked swiftly with the district attorney's office to secure an arrest warrant. On August 8, 2002, the quiet town of Troop was shaken once again when news broke that their respected Methodist pastor had been arrested as the prime suspect in his wife's murder. However, his time behind bars was brief. He was released the same day after posting a $50,000 bail. Mike's legal team had already begun negotiations with the court, arranging for his preliminary hearing to take place in mid-August. A plea deal was in the works that would allow him to avoid a lengthy trial in exchange for a 50-year prison sentence. But when the hearing date arrived, Mike was nowhere to be found. Authorities soon discovered he had attempted to take his own life. His defense attorneys claimed he was hospitalized, but prosecutors argued that this was an attempt to escape justice and demanded additional penalties. According to his family, Mike had been staying at his parents' house in the days leading up to the hearing. One afternoon, he went for a walk and never returned. Concerned, his family alerted authorities, who launched a search. He was found near a lake with a self-inflicted stab wound. The injury was severe enough to require immediate surgery, which lasted nearly 3 hours. During the investigation, a witness came forward, stating they had seen Mike hiding behind a tree and throwing an object into the water. A team of divers was deployed, and after searching the murky depths, they recovered a knife believed to have been used in the attempt on his own life. Given these events, prosecutors sought to extend his prison sentence from 50 to 55 years, while a judge increased his bail to $1 million. On September 29, 2003, Mike appeared before the district court, showing no visible emotion as he formally accepted the prosecution's plea deal. His defense attorney told reporters that they had chosen to avoid a full trial, as it would bring to light painful details that neither Mara's nor Mike's family wanted exposed. The attorney acknowledged that Mike had taken Mara's life, but suggested that the exact motive would remain unknown. He claimed that Mike's primary concern was protecting his children from ever hearing the grim details of their mother's death. However, that hope proved futile. The case had drawn widespread media attention, and the tragic circumstances surrounding Mara's murder became impossible to keep hidden. Before the judge delivered the final sentence, Melanie took the stand to deliver a victim impact statement on behalf of the family. Her voice trembled with emotion as she addressed Mike directly, reminding him that he had orphaned his own children. She demanded that he take responsibility and stand before the court to admit that it was his own hands that had stolen their mother from them. The judge then issued the final ruling. Mike Tabb was sentenced to 55 years in prison for the murder of Mara Tabb. Prosecutors clarified that under Texas law, he would not be eligible for parole until he had served at least 27.5 years behind bars. Throughout the proceedings, Mike remained silent and emotionless. Reports later surfaced that he had attempted to end his life multiple times while incarcerated. Despite receiving psychological treatment, his internal torment never subsided. Analysts speculated that the immense guilt weighed heavily on him, perhaps a lingering consequence of his past as a preacher who once stood before a congregation preaching about morality and faith. The final piece of information uncovered during this investigation revealed that Mike ultimately served only 20 years of his sentence. He died in 2023, and his name was inscribed on a headstone in a Texas cemetery with no mention of his date of death. No official statement was released regarding the cause of death. Ironically, his family listed Mara as his spouse in his memorial records. His tombstone bore the epitaph, "Loving Son." Perhaps Mike truly had been a devoted son known for his affection toward his parents, but in the end, his selfishness and hidden desires robbed his children of a father they could admire. More tragically, he deprived Mara of the chance to see her sons grow into men, a future she had once envisioned as a faithful wife and mother, now stolen by the very person who had vowed to love and protect her. The tragic story of Mara Tabb serves as a haunting reminder of the complexities of love, faith, and betrayal. It highlights the devastating consequences of hidden lives and the impact of domestic strife on families. Mara's legacy lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and her story continues to resonate as a cautionary tale about the fragility of trust and the importance of open communication in relationships. A quiet morning in Graham, Pennsylvania. The sun rises, casting soft light over the peaceful town. Suddenly, gunshots echo through the air. In a cozy home, a man collapses to the floor, gasping for breath, blood pooling around him. In the bedroom, a woman, Beverly, rushes out, confusion and terror on her face. She freezes at the sight of a gunman in the living room. Silence hangs for a moment, then more shots ring out. The sun rises higher, illuminating a still house. The neighborhood remains quiet. No signs of a break-in, nothing stolen. Two bodies lie side by side, covered with a blanket, as if someone wanted to hide the horror. Detectives gather at the police station, reviewing the case. They exchange glances, knowing they're about to uncover a disturbing story that will shock the town. A warm spring evening in 2001, two college students, Brian and Beverly, meet at a party. Their eyes lock, and an undeniable connection sparks. They share laughter, stories, and a dance. Their bond deepens over the summer as they introduce each other to their families. Beverly, an energetic athlete, excels in sports and has a gift for music. Brian is drawn to extreme sports, always seeking the next challenge. After graduating, they focus on building a future together, saving to buy their own home. On May 15, 2006, they exchange vows in a breathtaking seaside ceremony. Their honeymoon is an adventure, taking them to several countries before they return home to start the next chapter of their lives. They settle in Graham, purchasing a beautiful house near a river and a dense forest. It is the ideal place to lay down roots. Brian continues his work as an engineer, and Beverly shifts her focus to translation work while pursuing further studies. They quickly become part of the local community. The morning is still. Brian's friend, Stephen, arrives for a fishing trip. He knocks on the door, but no one answers. He assumes his friend has overslept. He knocks again, louder this time, but the silence makes him uneasy. Frustrated but not alarmed, he decides to go fishing alone. As the day passes with no word from Brian or Beverly, Stephen's unease grows. That evening, he returns to their house, knocking once more. The silence is unsettling. He circles the property, peering through the windows, but the house is dark. When he reaches the garage, he notices that Brian and Beverly's car is parked inside. That makes no sense. Walking to the living room window, he presses his face to the glass, straining to see inside. The dim light makes visibility difficult, but something on the floor catches his attention. The television is overturned, and next to it lies a large, unmoving shape. Stephen's pulse quickens. He rushes to his car, grabs his flashlight, and directs the beam through the window. What he sees makes his blood run cold. Lying motionless on the floor are two bodies, partially covered by a blood-soaked blanket. Panic surges through him as he fumbles for his phone and dials 911. His voice shakes as he reports what he has seen, urging authorities to come immediately. He remains outside, waiting, unable to tear his eyes away from the tragic scene. Officers arrive, and Stephen is the first person they question. He explains everything: the planned fishing trip, the unanswered calls, and the horrifying discovery. He can't shake the feeling of regret, wishing he had checked the windows earlier. Inside, the scene is grim. The front door isn't locked, nor does it show signs of forced entry. In the living room, Brian and Beverly's lifeless bodies are found just as Stephen had seen them. Preliminary findings suggest they had been dead for at least 12 hours. Each had sustained 3 gunshot wounds from a large caliber weapon. The precision of the shots indicates that the attacker was deliberate. But why? There is no evidence of a robbery. Nothing is missing. Their wallets, phones, and cash remain untouched. There are no signs of a struggle, no indication that anyone had tried to fight back. It is as if whoever had done this had come with one goal in mind: execution. One disturbing detail stands out. The bodies had been moved after the murders. Blood smeared across the floor reveals drag marks, and the perpetrator had made a clumsy attempt at cleaning up. Smudged streaks of blood mar the walls and furniture. Despite the effort to erase evidence, forensic specialists can still follow the trail. 6 spent shell casings lie at the scene, carelessly abandoned. The evidence suggests that a single assailant fired every shot. The lack of forced entry raises another troubling question. The door had been unlocked, suggesting that Brian and Beverly had willingly allowed their killer inside. Investigators theorize that Brian had answered a knock at the door and recognized the visitor. Perhaps he had turned to lead them into the house when, without warning, 3 bullets struck him in the back. The sound must have drawn Beverly from the bedroom. She likely froze in horror at the sight of her husband's lifeless body and the armed intruder standing over him. She ran, but didn't make it far. 3 bullets struck her from behind, cutting her down in the hallway. Her body was later dragged to the living room, placed beside Brian's. One perplexing detail remains. The killer had covered the bodies with a blanket. Was it an act of remorse, an attempt to conceal the brutality of the crime? The floor is smeared with blood, as if someone had tried to clean it, but only made the mess worse. Behind the couch, officers discover a plastic broom with dried blood clinging to its bristles. The handle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. This suggests the killer had used it to sweep away bloody footprints, but had taken care to erase any trace of their identity. Smudged handprints and palm prints dot the walls, too distorted to yield a clear match. Despite the killer's effort to obscure their presence, forensic experts know one thing. The longer someone stays at a crime scene, the greater the likelihood of leaving behind an incriminating clue. Then they find it. On the blanket covering Brian and Beverly's bodies, there is a faint but crucial detail: a boot print. The pattern is distinctive. Forensic analysis determines that it comes from a rare model of heavy-duty work boots. Investigators traced the boots to a construction company in Clearfield County that had recently purchased several pairs. Another potential breakthrough comes when detectives find a palm print on one of the house surfaces. It is carefully analyzed and run through law enforcement databases. No match. The perpetrator has no criminal record, making identification difficult. Naturally, the first person under suspicion is Stephen, the friend who discovered the bodies. He had visited the house twice that day and had been the one to alert authorities. When detectives question him, Stephen is visibly shaken. He explains that he had assumed Brian and Beverly were still asleep when they hadn't answered the door that morning. Once he realizes he is being treated as a suspect, Stephen is shocked. He claims he had spent the entire day fishing at a secluded spot by the river, but since no one had been there with him, he has no alibi. Investigators review footage from traffic cameras along the roads leading to and from the fishing area. The recordings confirm Stephen's timeline. Further forensic testing clears him. His fingerprints don't match any found at the scene, and tests for gunshot residue come back negative. With no physical evidence tying him to the crime, Stephen is officially ruled out. Hoping for another lead, detectives canvass the neighborhood. When they knock on the door of Daniel and Jennifer Tavares, who live across the street, they finally get something useful. Daniel recalls that on the morning of the murders, around 5:30 a.m., he heard loud noises coming from the couple's home. Curious but wary, Daniel glances out the window and notices a white pickup truck parked near Brian and Beverly's house. He is sure the vehicle doesn't belong to them. Moments later, he sees two men exit the house. Despite this promising lead, no one else in the neighborhood has seen the truck or its occupants. During an interview with detectives, Beverly's mother recalls a troubling conversation she had with her daughter just months before the tragedy. Beverly had mentioned a neighbor, Jeremy Flint, who had made her feel uneasy. Jeremy, a 22-year-old man, has a reputation that has already drawn law enforcement's attention. He is known for dealing illegal substances. Given his history, investigators consider him a person of interest. When officers go to Jeremy's home, they find it empty. Their immediate thought is that he has fled after committing the crime. However, speaking with local residents reveals another potential motive. Shortly before the murders, Brian and Beverly had hosted a small gathering at their house. Jeremy, uninvited and heavily intoxicated, had barged in. Witnesses recall his erratic behavior, harassing guests and stirring up conflict. After a heated exchange, he is forced to leave, but before storming off, he makes a chilling threat. The couple would regret humiliating him. The next morning, Brian and Beverly discover that several items are missing from their home, including a cell phone and a handgun. Convinced Jeremy is behind the theft, they confront him at his house. Though they remain calm, they make it clear that if their belongings aren't returned, they will report him to the authorities. Jeremy denies taking anything. The following day, the missing belongings mysteriously reappear in the couple's backyard. While the situation seems resolved, Beverly can't shake her unease. She begins to fear being home alone. Jeremy finally resurfaces several days after the murders. Detectives bring him in for questioning, but their suspicions quickly begin to fade. As it turns out, Jeremy has been out of town when the crime takes place. His alibi is airtight, confirmed by multiple witnesses, which places him miles away on the night of the murders. Further forensic analysis seals his innocence. His fingerprints don't match any found at the scene. With no evidence tying him to the crime, Jeremy is eliminated as a suspect. With their strongest lead gone, investigators find themselves back at square one. Desperate for a breakthrough, they revisit Daniel Tarvis. Daniel had initially reported seeing a suspicious white pickup truck near Brian and Beverly's home. But when detectives speak to him again, his story has changed. Suddenly, Daniel claims he can now recall details about what the perpetrators were wearing. This contradicts his original statement. His shifting story raises a chilling possibility. Had Daniel been lying all along? A deeper look into Daniel's background reveals a disturbing history. Born into a strict military family, Daniel's early years are marked by hardship. By the time Daniel reaches 9th grade, his life has spiraled out of control. He drops out of school, becomes involved in petty theft, and is arrested for robbery at 18. His estranged father intervenes, helping him avoid jail time, but Daniel squanders it. Over the years, he continues his descent into crime. In July 1991, a heated argument with his mother escalates into something unimaginable. In a sudden attack, Daniel grabs a knife and stabs her nearly 30 times. He is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite being sentenced to 20 years, Daniel is released on parole in 2006. A mix of bureaucratic failures allows him to slip through the system unnoticed. A clerical error results in his fingerprints being erased from law enforcement databases. Further digging reveals another troubling detail. Daniel had briefly worked for the construction company that had purchased the rare work boots linked to the murder. Despite this, detectives lacked direct evidence to arrest him. Detectives invite Daniel to the police station under the pretense of helping create composite sketches of potential suspects. Eager to cooperate, he agrees. Moments later, another officer mentions a key discovery: the bloody handprint found inside the Mock's home. Daniel tenses, nervously explaining that he has visited the Mock home in the past. The officer reassures him that there is no reason to worry. After all, the handprint is in blood. At that moment, a second detective steers the conversation toward Daniel's past. When asked, Daniel admits to killing his mother, but what happens next stuns investigators. Instead of expressing remorse, Daniel recounts the murder in chilling detail, showing an eerie detachment. While he rambles, forensic analysts complete their work. The bloody handprint from the crime scene is an exact match to Daniel Tarvis. Detectives confront him with the evidence. His smugness vanishes. Before he can react, officers restrain him and place him under arrest. Faced with undeniable proof, Daniel admits to what happened that morning. The previous night, he had spent hours at a bar drinking heavily. By the time he had run out of money, he was belligerent. Furious and humiliated, Daniel fixated on an absurd thought. Brian owed him money. A month earlier, Daniel had given Brian a tattoo as a favor, but now, in his intoxicated state, he convinced himself that Brian had taken advantage of him. At 5 a.m., still seething, Daniel grabbed his revolver and walked over to the Mock's house. When Brian answered the door, he was groggy. Daniel immediately demanded payment for the tattoo. Confused, Brian refused, telling Daniel to come back when he was sober. Enraged, Daniel pulled out his gun and shot Brian 3 times in the back. The gunfire woke Beverly, who rushed out of the bedroom to find her husband lying motionless. She froze, locking eyes with Daniel. Realizing the danger, she turned to flee, but only made it a few steps before 3 bullets struck her from behind. Once the horrific act was done, Daniel panicked. He ran home, waking his wife Jennifer. Without hesitation, she agreed to help him cover up the crime. Together, they returned to the Mock's house. Jennifer helped move Beverly's body into the living room, placing her beside Brian. She then grabbed a blanket and covered them both. She was also the one who suggested using a broom to erase the bloody footprints. When the cleanup was done, Daniel disposed of the murder weapon, throwing it into a nearby river. Despite extensive searches, the gun is never recovered. With his confession and forensic evidence stacked against him, Daniel has no hope of freedom. He is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jennifer, claiming she only helped out of fear, cooperates fully with investigators. She is sentenced to 1 year in prison for tampering with evidence. The case seems closed, but Daniel Tarvis's dark history is far from over. Years later, in 2015, the past resurfaces in a horrifying way. New homeowners purchase the house where Daniel had once lived with his mother. During renovations, they begin digging up the backyard and unearth human remains. Forensic analysis confirms what detectives had feared. The bones belonged to a young woman who had gone missing in 1990. As investigators piece the story together, a disturbing truth emerges. Daniel had known the woman. She had been a neighbor. Rather than risk getting caught, he had buried her in his mother's backyard, where her body remained hidden for decades. The new evidence leads to Daniel receiving a second life sentence. It is now clear that Daniel Tarvis had always been a predator, lurking in the shadows, and for years he had managed to escape justice. Until at last the truth caught up with him.
I search a young boy between 18 and 25-year-old. Have you a normal body? I butchering you and eat your horny flesh.
This chilling story may sound like something out of horror fiction, but it's all too real, and it led to a crime so shocking that it made headlines around the world. What makes this case even more bizarre is that the victim willingly agreed to be butchered and eaten. Before Jeffrey Dahmer shocked the world, there was Armin Meiwes, a man infamously dubbed the most respectful killer. While that title may sound strange, the twisted details of his story will help you understand why. It all begins with Armin's childhood, as his descent into darkness started long before the horrifying act itself. Born on December 1, 1961, in Germany, Armin came from a family that appeared to have it all. His father was a police officer, providing a stable and respected income that allowed the family to live in a lavish 36-room mansion, a sprawling 16,000 square feet of wealth and success that many would envy. However, the reality within those grand walls was far from ideal. Armin's parents had a significant age gap. His mother was 40 when she married his father, who was only 21 at the time. This disparity set the stage for a troubled relationship. Armin later described his mother as controlling, manipulative, and deeply possessive. She was frequently jealous and often accused her husband of infidelity. Armin believed his mother had intentionally gotten pregnant with him, not out of a natural desire for a child, but as a strategy to keep his father from leaving her. According to Armin, she didn't want a baby, she wanted to keep her husband. As Armin grew up, he felt the emotional toll of living in a home filled with tension. His mother's controlling behavior created a toxic environment, leading to constant fights between his parents. These arguments often escalated to the point where Armin's mother would threaten to harm herself or him if things didn't go her way. This instability left Armin navigating an emotionally suffocating atmosphere. Being the youngest of 3 children, Armin watched as his older siblings, overwhelmed by the chaos, left home when he was just 5 or 6 years old. Their departure left him feeling isolated and abandoned, not just by them, but also by his father, who would soon leave as well. When Armin was just 7, his father packed up and left without warning, never to return. This abandonment was devastating for Armin, who had already lost his siblings and now found himself without a father. The emotional weight of these departures created a deep sense of loneliness that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the midst of this turmoil, Armin's relationship with his mother remained distant and unloving. She showed no affection or care for him, often being cruel and demanding. By the time he was 6 or 7, Armin was responsible for maintaining the household while his mother barely contributed. She yelled at him regularly, creating an environment where he felt invisible and unloved. There was no warmth or tenderness in his home, only an overwhelming sense of neglect. To cope with his emotional turmoil, Armin turned to books. He found solace in reading, particularly in the classic novel Robinson Crusoe. One passage in the book, which referenced cannibalism, captured his attention and left a lasting impact. By the age of 10, Armin became obsessed with the idea of eating another person. This morbid fascination marked the beginning of his dark desires, evolving from mere curiosity into an obsession that would define his life. However, this fascination wouldn't manifest for many years. At 19, Armin left home to join the West German Army, hoping to build a future as a professional soldier. He spent 12 years in the armed forces, a time when he felt a sense of normalcy that helped keep his darker thoughts at bay. During his time in the Army, he formed friendships with women, but none of these relationships went beyond the surface. Armin began to question his own sexuality, often asking friends, "Do you think I'm gay?" His friends would respond, "That's something you need to figure out for yourself." One friend later mentioned that everyone seemed to know Armin might be gay, but he was the last to realize it, or perhaps he just didn't understand it at the time. Armin's confusion led him to drink heavily, resulting in 2 car accidents caused by driving while intoxicated. After these incidents, he was discharged from the Army. At 32, he moved back home to care for his ailing mother, who was now struggling with illness and unable to take care of herself. Although she had never been independent, Armin's return meant he would be responsible for looking after her in the large mansion that had once been filled with tension and coldness. During this time, Armin decided to change careers, becoming a computer engineer and finding success working for a bank. However, the 1990s introduced him to something that would change everything: the World Wide Web. Back then, the internet was new, and websites were often crude and unregulated. This lack of supervision would soon play a crucial role in Armin's growing obsession. As Armin began exploring the internet, he stumbled upon a community of people who shared his dark interest: cannibalism. This online forum, known as Cannibal Cafe, allowed individuals with cannibalistic fantasies to meet and discuss their desires freely. For Armin, finding this community was both shocking and relieving. Finally, he wasn't alone. There were others who shared his twisted thoughts, and for the first time, he felt understood. The internet blurred the line between fantasy and reality. Eager to explore his desires further, Armin created his own website to openly discuss cannibalism. He even began making fake images to fuel the fantasies of himself and others in the community. If you're thinking about searching it up, just a heads up: the website isn't available anymore. However, if you use the Wayback Machine, a tool that allows you to browse old websites, you can still catch glimpses of what it once was. Although most of the site is gone, you won't find any of Armin's posts from that era. After things took a dark turn, his contributions were scrubbed. Essentially, it was a forum where users openly posted about their darkest fantasies. Posts like, "I want to eat your flesh," or "I can't wait to kill this person and devour them," were disturbingly common. In this unsettling corner of the web, Armin found a way to connect with others who shared his grotesque fantasies. Instead of merely talking about it, he decided to take matters into his own hands, quite literally. He visited butcher shops, bought real meat, and manipulated it to resemble human body parts. With a mix of sickening creativity and an eerie desire to be seen as a real cannibal, he photographed his creations and posted them online, painting a horrifying picture of murder and consumption. Many were fooled. They believed his gruesome posts and began to idolize him. In a space where fantasies ran wild, Armin seemed all too real. His online persona gained traction as he manipulated the forum, slowly building a reputation among users as the man who was actually living out his darkest urges. But on September 2nd, 1999, Armin's life took a new turn. He came home from work, entered his mother's bedroom, and discovered her lifeless body. Most people would be filled with grief or sadness, but not Armin. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For years, his mother had controlled his life, manipulating him with her possessive and abusive behavior. Without her judgment and control, he felt free to indulge in his depraved fantasies. No longer confined by her presence, Armin transformed one of the rooms in the house into his cannibal room, a private space where he could live out his twisted dreams, untouched by societal norms or restrictions. What followed was a descent into madness as Armin sought out others willing to fulfill his darkest desires. The post you saw at the beginning was just the start. Surprisingly, Armin received numerous responses from people expressing interest, but most backed out at the last moment. However, one man stood out and was determined to follow through. This man, whose name remains unknown, continued emailing Armin, expressing a deep interest in his bizarre and horrifying fantasy. In their exchanges, he openly admitted that it was his fantasy to be eaten. Armin, presumably intrigued, responded positively and arranged a meeting at his house. When the man arrived at Armin's mansion, he was greeted by a grim scene. Armin had set the stage for his dark intentions, laying the man out on a table while explaining step by step what was about to unfold. But in a sudden shift, the man admitted that he wasn't feeling well and no longer wanted to go through with the ordeal. To Armin's surprise, he allowed the man to get up and leave. While clearly disappointed, Armin didn't want to force anyone into the horrific situation he had planned. If you think about it, that man was fortunate. Armin wasn't entirely consumed by his madness, and the situation didn't escalate further. However, Armin was undeterred. Still determined to create the illusion of fulfilling his grotesque fantasy, he resorted to a disturbing form of creativity. He crafted a lifelike body out of papier-mâché, painting it to resemble a real human form. Additionally, he acquired an old mannequin from a store that was being discarded, painted it to look like a dead body, and photographed the result. Armin then posted these images on the Cannibal website, further fueling his online notoriety. The site's users were enthralled, believing that Armin had actually killed and consumed a person. They hailed him as a hero, a true embodiment of the cannibalistic fantasy they all shared. Despite these online theatrics, Armin's desire to find a willing participant never wavered. He continued his search, preparing for the day he would find someone willing to die for his twisted purpose. One of the rooms in his mansion was transformed into what he referred to as his slaughter room. This room was devoid of windows, with a cage to hold his victims and meat hooks hanging from the ceiling, an ominous setup reminiscent of something straight out of a horror movie. Finally, Armin's persistence paid off when he received a response from a man named Brandes. Brandes, a 34-year-old engineer, had recently separated from his wife after revealing his curiosity about exploring relationships with men. His inner turmoil over his sexuality had likely caused strain within his marriage, and his wife's departure left him to confront his desires alone. Brandes had also been active on the Cannibal forums and expressed a willingness to participate in Armin's horrific fantasy. The two exchanged numerous emails, during which Armin detailed what he intended to do with Brandes's body once the act was completed. Brandes proposed his own ideas, requesting that his skull be used as an ashtray after his death. In a deeply disturbing exchange, he also asked for his penis to be severed and for both men to partake in eating it together. Armin, who would later discuss his motivations in interviews, insisted that he never wanted to violate the wishes of his volunteers. If someone wanted to be consumed in a particular way, he was more than willing to accommodate their request. His twisted sense of respect dictated that every detail should align with his victim's desires. After weeks of correspondence, a date was set. March 9, 2001. Brandes would travel to Armin's home, where the two would carry out their unthinkable plan. Upon his arrival, they engaged in sexual relations before proceeding with the preparations. Armin, intent on minimizing Brandes's pain, provided him with sleeping pills, alcohol, and even Vicks, believing this combination would dull any suffering. Brandes accepted these substances willingly, fully aware of what was to come. Armin also informed him that the entire process would be recorded, allowing Brandes to relive the experience long after it was over. With the camera positioned and ready to capture everything, Brandes lay down on the table. Staying true to their agreement, Armin began with the act Brandes had requested. With a sharp blade, he severed the man's genitalia. In later interviews, Armin described how Brandes let out a horrific scream, but only for about 20 to 30 seconds. Blood sprayed from the wound, resembling a fountain, an image that would be forever burned into Armin's memory. But the night's horrors were far from over. Armin, still adhering to Brandes' wishes, took the severed organ to the kitchen, attempting to prepare it as a meal. With meticulous care, he seasoned it with garlic, salt, and pepper before placing it in a pan with oil. The surreal nature of the moment was not lost on him, nor would it be lost on the investigators who would later uncover the grim details of this crime. After attempting to cook the severed organ, Armin plated it neatly, serving it to both himself and Brandes. However, the experience was not what he had imagined. The flesh was incredibly tough and nearly impossible to chew. Disappointed, Armin admitted that it tasted horrible, chewy, rubbery, and just not what he expected. Meanwhile, Brandes was bleeding heavily, and the mess was getting out of control. To contain it, Armin moved him to the bathtub, thinking the running water would help. Every 15 minutes, he checked on Brandes, expecting him to pass quickly. But the process was taking much longer than he thought. Time dragged on, and as he waited, he picked up a Star Trek novel to pass the time. Even as he read, Brandes was still alive, slowly fading away. After nearly 3 hours, Armin decided to speed things up. He walked into the bathroom, looked at Brandes, and simply said, "Sorry, but you're taking too long." He kissed him and then slit his throat. With Brandes dead, Armin got to work. He dragged the body out of the tub, chopped it into pieces, and carefully stored different parts in his freezer. The skull, however, was given a separate resting place. It was buried in his garden. The rest of the remains were wrapped and preserved for later meals. In an interview, Armin described how he carefully set the table, lighting candles and using his finest dinnerware. He prepared a piece of meat from Brandes's back, frying it with potatoes and Brussels sprouts. He noted that it tasted like pork, harsh and substantial. For the next 6 to 8 months, Armin lived off Brandes's remains, storing the pieces in his freezer under stacks of pizza boxes. He ate the meat in various ways, sometimes frying it, sometimes using it as a pizza topping, even having it for breakfast. But eating wasn't enough. He needed validation. He returned to the cannibal forums and uploaded photos of Brandes's remains, showcasing his achievement to the dark corners of the internet. His posts sparked excitement among others on the site, and they showered him with admiration. By late November or early December, Armin found himself running low on his supply of human meat, which he had been consuming for several months. Wanting a fresh victim, he returned to the cannibal websites, posting advertisements for a new volunteer. However, his online activity caught the attention of an Austrian student who stumbled upon Armin's posts and the disturbing images he had shared. Realizing that this wasn't just a fantasy, the student tipped off the police, saying, "I think this guy actually killed someone." On the morning of December 10, 2002, police arrived at Armin's mansion. As they searched the house, they initially found nothing unusual. However, when they opened the freezer, hidden beneath stacks of pizza boxes, they discovered 50 pounds of meat. Armin calmly told them it was wild pig. But upon closer inspection, officers noticed something shocking. The flesh still had human skin attached. Confronted with the truth, Armin didn't try to hide anything. He confessed immediately, admitting everything he had done, even handing over his computer, the photos, and the VHS tape documenting the crime. The police arrested him on the spot, and as the case unfolded, the details horrified the public. On January 30th, 2004, Armin was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to only 8.5 years in prison. This sparked outrage, as many believed the punishment was far too lenient. However, his defense was unusual but strong. Brandes had willingly participated, as proven by the emails and the fact that he had traveled to Armin's home voluntarily. This case exposed a shocking legal loophole in Germany. Cannibalism was not technically illegal. With public pressure mounting, prosecutors pushed for a retrial, arguing that Brandes was not in a stable state of mind to consent to his own death. On May 10, 2006, Armin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Since then, he has undergone a surprising transformation. While serving his sentence, he became a vegetarian, rejecting meat altogether. He has also given multiple interviews, easily found online, where he speaks calmly and articulately about his crimes. Watching him, you wouldn't suspect he was a murderer. But if there's one thing true crime has taught us, it's that killers often look completely normal. Armin has acknowledged that what he did was wrong, but the damage was already done. His case remains one of the most disturbing in modern history. So what do you think? Did he deserve life in prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you have another story you'd like me to cover next, drop it below. If you enjoy the way we create these videos and want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you for watching.
Breaking news tonight, the return of Tatman.
I feel that it's necessary, if I'm going to continue to operate appropriately as a legal advocate, that I start to advocate for myself and also advocate for my daughter.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who killed her mother due to years of abuse, doesn't consider herself innocent. But before we delve into her latest developments, let's rewind and explore how a seemingly ordinary young woman became the center of one of the most controversial murder trials in modern history. The story begins with a frantic 911 call that marked the beginning of the unraveling case of Caylee Anthony, the 2-year-old girl who vanished without a trace. What made the situation even more disturbing was that her own mother, Casey Anthony, never reported her missing. Instead, for an entire month, she lived her life as if nothing had happened, partying, hanging out with friends, and even getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, meaning beautiful life. Meanwhile, Caylee was nowhere to be found. Eventually, Casey claimed that Caylee had been kidnapped by a nanny named Zanny. However, as investigators dug deeper, they discovered that this so-called nanny didn't even exist. It was just one of the many lies Casey told throughout the investigation. So, what really happened? How did Caylee go missing? And more importantly, how did Casey walk free despite all the evidence pointing to her guilt? For starters, Casey Marie Anthony was born on March 16, 1986, in Warren, Ohio, to George and Cindy Anthony. She grew up in a middle-class home alongside her older brother, Lee. From the outside, her life seemed normal. Her father was a former police officer, and her mother was a home care nurse. However, even as a child, Casey exhibited a troubling pattern of lying, not just harmless little fibs, but habitual dishonesty. Those who knew her recalled how she would lie for no apparent reason, even when the truth was obvious. If caught, she would deny it and spin a new story. As Casey grew older, her lying escalated. In high school, she distanced herself from her family, keeping them in the dark about her personal life. She was social and outgoing, but also secretive. Her parents later admitted they had no idea who her real friends were or what she was doing when she wasn't home. One of her first major lies was about her high school graduation. Casey let her parents believe she had enough credits to graduate, leading them to plan a celebration. But she hadn't graduated at all and eventually dropped out. Soon after, she claimed to have secured a job at Universal Studios, working at the Hard Rock Cafe. Every day she would leave home as if heading to work, returning in the evening to discuss her supposed co-workers and experiences. In January 2005, Casey's life took a seemingly positive turn when she met Jesse Grund, a young man she quickly fell in love with. To the outside world, things were looking up for her. But later that year, at just 19 years old, Casey found out she was pregnant. This revelation threw her into a state of uncertainty. She confided in friends that she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep the baby, considering adoption as an option. However, she kept the pregnancy a secret from her parents until she was 7 months along. When she finally revealed the truth, her parents were outraged at the thought of adoption and insisted that their grandchild would be part of the family. On August 9, 2005, Casey gave birth to a baby girl, Kaylee Marie Anthony. From the moment she was born, Kaylee became the light of the Anthony family's life, especially for Cindy, who took on a maternal role in raising her granddaughter. However, Casey continued to weave a web of lies. She initially told Jesse that he was the father, but a paternity test later revealed he was not. This left a major question mark over Kaylee's true parentage, and Casey offered multiple versions of the story, claiming at one point that the father had died in a car accident. Despite the mystery surrounding Kaylee's biological father, Cindy and George never pressed Casey for the truth. Their focus was on Kaylee herself, and in their eyes, she was part of the family, regardless of who her father was. However, many who followed Casey's case were more concerned about her constant lies, which made it difficult for anyone to trust her. One of the strangest decisions the Anthony family made was to keep Casey's pregnancy a secret, even from her brother Lee, who lived in the same house. He only learned the truth days before Kaylee's birth and was furious that his parents had kept such a significant event from him. As a new mother, Casey introduced a nanny into the picture, Zanny, whose full name she claimed was Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zanny was an ex-girlfriend of a man named Jeff, an IT worker from Universal Studios, who had even paid for Kaylee's child care. However, Casey's parents found this arrangement bizarre, as they had never met Zanny or knew where she lived. During this time, Jesse proposed to Casey, but after a DNA test revealed he was not Kaylee's biological father, he ended their engagement. Casey quickly embraced the party scene, spending nights out while her parents took care of Kaylee. On June 15, 2008, a heated argument erupted within the family. The following morning, Casey left with Kaylee for what she claimed was a work trip to Tampa, Florida. However, this was just another lie. She spent the next few weeks partying and living as if nothing had happened. When Cindy called to check on Kaylee, Casey offered evasive responses, claiming she was with the nanny or sleeping. As the weeks passed, Cindy grew increasingly concerned. During one of her nights out, Casey met Tony Lazaro, an aspiring DJ, and began spending more time at his apartment, sometimes bringing Kaylee along. Despite having a new boyfriend, Casey still lived at home with her parents, who remained the primary caregivers for Kaylee. Desperate for answers, Cindy drove to Casey's boyfriend's apartment to confront her directly. When she arrived, she was met with an unsettling scene, drug paraphernalia scattered throughout the living room. Cindy demanded to know where Kaylee was, but Casey simply repeated that she was with the nanny. Frustrated, Cindy insisted that Casey come home with her, and Casey reluctantly agreed. Back at the family home, Cindy reached her breaking point. She called 911 to report Casey for stealing and abandoning the car, but what she said next sent chills down the dispatcher's spine. She reported that her 3-year-old granddaughter had been missing for a month. As Cindy waited for the police to arrive, she overheard Casey talking to her brother Lee, claiming that she had met the nanny at a park to drop off Kaylee. But Zanny had allegedly grabbed the child and refused to return her. Horrified, Cindy called 911 again to report a possible kidnapping. When officers arrived, they pressed Casey for information. She claimed she knew exactly who had Kaylee, the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez. However, when police checked with the apartment management where Casey claimed Zanny lived, they discovered that no one had lived there since March. Suspicion deepened when surveillance footage failed to show any sign of the so-called nanny. By this point, investigators were convinced that Casey Anthony was lying. They began digging into her claims, discovering that she had never worked at Universal Studios, despite repeatedly telling friends and family that she did. When police confronted Casey, she led them to Universal Studios, but as they wandered through the offices, it became clear she was stalling. With her credibility in tatters, police arrested her on July 16, 2008, charging her with child neglect, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. Meanwhile, Cindy sat down with detectives and revealed that when she retrieved Casey's abandoned car from the impound lot, it reeked of death. Inside the trunk, she found trash, a rotting pizza box filled with maggots, and a stench so overwhelming that she initially thought something had died inside. Despite this, she tried to dismiss it as just rotting food. Detectives weren't convinced. They reminded her that she had explicitly stated on her 911 call that it smelled like a dead body. Forensic investigators searched Casey's car, bringing in cadaver dogs trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. When the dogs reached the trunk, they went wild, signaling that they had picked up the unmistakable scent of a dead body. Further inspection revealed a small stain on the trunk liner, eerily the size of a small body. Investigators removed the trunk carpet for testing, which revealed evidence of human decomposition and an alarmingly high level of chloroform, a substance that can render someone unconscious. Inside the trunk, forensic experts found a single hair. Through mitochondrial DNA testing, they determined that the hair belonged to someone in the Anthony family, either Cindy, Casey, or Kaylee. However, the hair had a decomposition band, indicating it could only belong to Kaylee. As investigators seized the family's home computer, they uncovered a shocking search: how to make chloroform. This wasn't a random click, it was a deliberate search. When confronted, Cindy claimed she had been researching chlorophyll for her dogs, but it was proven that Casey was the only person at the house when the search was made. In a desperate attempt to get more answers, Cindy visited Casey in jail, asking her what Zanny looked like. But as it turned out, Zanny never existed. The woman Casey had blamed for Kaylee's disappearance was a complete fabrication. In a chilling twist, Casey painted herself as a victim of her father's abuse, claiming he was responsible for Kaylee's death. Meanwhile, George and Cindy Anthony were not staying silent. They appeared on an A&E true crime reality show, taking lie detector tests while recounting Kaylee's tragic disappearance. As the trial began on May 24, 2011, the nation was watching. Casey's defense attorney claimed that Kaylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool and that George had helped cover it up. The prosecution, however, argued that Casey had murdered her daughter to escape motherhood, presenting evidence of her partying lifestyle in the days following Kaylee's disappearance. After 11 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning a shocking verdict. Casey Anthony was found not guilty of murder. The decision sent shockwaves through the nation, with many believing she had gotten away with murder. On July 17, 2011, Casey walked out of jail a free woman, having served time for her false statements to police. But freedom came at a cost. She became one of the most hated women in America. Despite the public outrage, Casey seemed unfazed. In March 2017, she gave her first interview since the trial, admitting to lying to the police, but showing little remorse. By December 2020, Casey was making moves again, filing paperwork to start her own private investigation business in South Florida. A source revealed that she wasn't looking for justice for Kaylee, but rather seeking profit from her notoriety. In November 2022, Casey reemerged for a televised tell-all, making bombshell accusations against her father. Meanwhile, George Anthony remained tight-lipped when approached by reporters, stating he was in contact with an attorney. As the Casey-Anthony saga continues to evolve, one question remains. Will justice ever come for Kaylee, or is she just another forgotten victim in a system that failed her? We can only hope that one day the truth will prevail and real justice will be served. If you like the way we create these videos and want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.